as we've gone over it before, the 18th chapter makes it obvious that describes Babylon. It's not speaking specifically of that region of land between Iran and Iraq. It's not speaking geographically of a particular portion of a country that basically will rise up to some form of power. God has specifically called out nations when he brings them out during the Battle of Armageddon. For the most part, he does bring out Babylon, the Iranians, the Iraqis, the Syrians, the Turkish, the Egyptians. He brings them out and he destroys them. But when it's all said and done, he has something special in store for Babylon. Babylon basically is described as possessing everything from verse 9. The kings of the earth who've committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her, lament her, when they shall see the smoke of her burning. So God's intention, after he brings the curses on these nations, when he's done bringing the sealed judgments, he's done bringing these vile judgments, when he's all done bringing these 21 judgments on the nations, tribulating Israel, doing away with those nations that always took pleasure in putting their feet on the neck of Israel, he has something in store for Babylon. And it describes her as having everything. Verse number 12. The merchandise of her gold, silver, precious stones, pearls, fine linen, purple silk, scarlet, thine wood, all manner of vessels of ivory, manner of vessels of most precious wood, brass, iron, marble, cinnamon, odors, ointments, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, beasts, sheep, horses, chariots. And we can go on and read, but everything men want, she has. Now, tell me that fits the Catholic Church. Doesn't. Does that fit the Muslim church? No. That sounds more like some commercial conglomerate than it does a religious system. In fact, I've often said that if you take money and look at it, it says Federal Reserve note. Doesn't have anything back in it. It takes more faith to believe that's worth anything. Most people run around with that Visa check card or that Visa card, and when you lay it down on the counter, you have no idea what's in your bank account. At least not until you reconcile your banking account, but you take that baby and lay it down. Sometimes, we cross our fingers behind us, right? But we lay it down. It's a system of faith. It's a religion of faith. We literally are trusting and believing that this system is actually going to function for us. And Babylon is not, as we're finding out, simply a system of money, but it's also a system of beliefs. Now, we've said it often, and I've said it many times, that as we go through on Tuesdays, we cross over and we intersect. And again, it crosses over and intersects. And as we go on through the teaching, we're finding that these teachings are crossing over and intersecting. And we come across another one of these intersections today. Sunday we were talking about how the Maccabean period, how during that aspect or during that time, what the devil does is he runs the same game on the church over and over. He doesn't change the play if the church has fallen for it. He doesn't change the play if it works. And we found that what the devil does is he keeps the church in a state of repairing, rebuilding walls, responding to the world system. If the church in response to the world system is always going to tailor its message, then the devil just continues, to run the world amok. We found that the church is controlled more by the world, whether you use the Greek word cosmos that's translated world or the Greek word aeon that describes the world. We're talking about not physically the planet, but the age. We're talking about the spirit of the age. And both literally are a flow, something that is continually changing. It's dynamic in that it's not similar. It's always flowing. It's always going. It's always changing. Whether it's the aeon, the zeitgeist, that current spirit of the day. It's always changing. We're finding that the church continually is motivated and moved by this. Now, in the book of Revelation here, we find that the Antichrist, having been destroyed, God now places his focus on Babylon. Now think about this. The Antichrist is destroyed. God now is going to deal with Babylon. Could you imagine God hating something more than the Antichrist? Huh? Could you imagine God finally getting vengeance on the nations that oppressed Israel, finally gets rid of the Antichrist and the beast, and suddenly he says, oh, Babylon. Huh? Something that God hates. And Babylon, as we've studied, has come to represent a network, a system, a false religion, not based on church per se, or a religious system per se, not the way we view it as far as an organized church, where we're going to bow to Mecca 5 times, or we're going to do, Hail Marys, or some religious liturgies, but a system of religion that the whole world gets caught up in, including the saints. The reason why God even says to them, hey, come out from her, because they're also trapped in this system. But we find ourselves now coming to a place of intersection, where Tuesdays and Sundays, they're crossing again. So Sunday we're talking about the Maccabees, how they were building the wall, it would get knocked down. They'd build the wall, it would get knocked down. They'd build the wall, it would get knocked down. It's the same game. Devil running the same game. They're going to straighten out morality. They're going to straighten out the devil. They're going to fix him. They're going to disacknowledge government in favor of God's. Everything was continual. Everything just kept cycling over and over. It was that treadmill that we were talking about. The church just performing. In the book of Revelation, at least we're finding that the system doesn't change. Now, we were reading out of Pat Buchanan's Death of the West, and we were talking about that Frankfurt School, and we're still talking about Hitler, by the way. We're just deviating a little because we came to find his plan is the same. But in this Frankfurt School that begun when the Nazis took power and Hitler took office, because that Frankfurt School, it was a philosophic school, and it had Jews in it, and it had humanists in it, and they didn't get along well with Hitler, so they had to leave. So they found a new home where? In New York, Columbia University. So all of a sudden, these people that want to be, Marxist socialists, they can't get along with Hitler, so they come over to America and they camp out in New York, and, they're not done. Suddenly they want to, mess with the country that let them in. It's like one of those house guests. You let them in your house, and they want to tear your house apart. So the school comes to America. Let's see where we left off. Here we go. We were talking about how they introduced critical theory, critical thinking. And what they did in this aspect was they said everything needs to be established. Everything established needs to be questioned. And one of the things that we found in the Old Testament was that every time God's people forgot their identity, every time they placed other things more important than God, they were literally either punished or they suffered consequence in the loss of their identity. Critical theory eventually induces cultural pessimism, a sense of alienation, of hopeless despair, where even though prosperous and free, a people come to see its society and country as oppressive, evil, and unworthy of loyalty and love. So, and again, this is what our kids are being taught today. And again, this is something that becomes important to us as parents because this is what everybody's doing. It's become popular to literally bash the country of our origin, the country that blesses us. Now, let me ask you a question. You ever tell your kids this? Hey, look, I feed you. I put a roof over your head. Don't come in this house and think you can bring that crap in here. Huh? Now, how come we can do that at home, but this country won't do it? Listen, let's be honest. If your son brings somebody over that's got drugs, do you want him in your house? Now, let's say you know the kid that's bringing in the drugs, and you got your eye out for him, and every time he comes in your house, you throw him out. Because you know what it'll do to your house. Now, is that okay? Is that right to do? So how come we don't do that at our borders? I'll leave that alone for a while. Even though prosperous and free, people come to see its society as a country of oppressive and evil and unworthy of loyalty and love. The new Marxists considered cultural pessimism necessary a necessary precondition of revolutionary change. Now remember what happened. These people basically are displaced now. They're no longer in Europe, but these are the people that failed the communist revolution in Russia, who move out into the areas of Europe, and then Europe doesn't want them. Now they end up here. And remember, there was a proletariat group of people, these working class people that were the downtrodden, the grassroots people, and this is what they were dealing with. But when they come to New York, we don't have a problem with the proletariat. We don't have a problem with workers hating their bosses. So they had to find a new proletariat. And we talked about who these proletariat were. They're the downtrodden. They're basically the new group. Let's go on and read some more. Under the impact of critical theory, many of the 60s generation, the most privileged in history, convinced themselves that they were living in an intolerable hell. Now, I came through the 60s, and we were rebellious. But looking back, it was far from hell. Huh? In The Greening of America, which enthralled Senator McGovern, Justice Douglas, and of the Washington Post, Charles Reich spoke of a total atmosphere of violence in American high schools. It was 30 years before Columbine. Reich did not mean with guns and knives. An examination or test is a form of violence. Now listen, these people are writing about violence in the schools, but not talking about like gun and knife violence. An examination or test is a form of violence. That means if your kid has a test, he can cry about it being violence. Now remember Sunday, what we were saying? On Sunday, what we were talking about is how if you reinterpret things, you can actually, if you can take something that means something and change its meaning, you in essence can change a generation. Here you've got a fellow who writes that if you give a kid an examination or a test, you're perpetrating violence on him. So what are you doing? You're redefining violence. Right? It's like the feminists that say a married woman is a rape victim. Now you've all heard that. What are they doing? They're redefining marriage. And we stay quiet about it. But an examination or test is a form of violence. Compulsory gym to one embarrassed or afraid is a form of violence. Remember the kid who didn't want to do PE? The requirement that a student must get a pass to walk in the hallway is violence. Compulsory attendance in the classroom, compulsory study hall is violence. Erich Fromm's Escape from Freedom and Wilhelm Reich's Mass Psychology of Fascism and the Sexual Revolution reflect critical theory. But the most influential book from the Frankfurt School ever published was The Authoritarian Personality. You need to pay attention to this one. Out of this school came this thinking. The authoritarian personality. In this altarpiece of the Frankfurt School, Karl Marx's economic determinism is replaced with cultural determinism. Now, again, in Russia, what was their problem? You had the haves, the have-nots. The cultural revolution they were looking for, not a cultural, the revolution they were looking for was an economic revolution. But now that they're in New York and they can't apply the same principles, what are they looking for? They're looking for another reason to change their theory or another group to associate their theory to. So what they're doing now is they're saying, look, we're not going to do this economic cultural change. We're going to bring in a social cultural change. If a family is deeply Christian and capitalist, ruled by an authoritarian father, you may expect the children to grow up to be racist and fascist. Hey, listen. This stuff was written a long time ago. And I told you Sunday that these people had a conviction that Christians need to have. These people understood that if they established doctrine, that they were going to die not seeing the fruition of their doctrine, but that it would in fact be perpetuated to the extent that it would eventually bear fruit. Same thing as Jesus. Jesus dies on the cross knowing that as he died on the cross, apparently a failure to the world, he was not able to see physically, humanly on the earth here. He was able to see it from heaven, but he saw literally the fruition of the church born after his ascension. The disciples, as they continued in their Christianity Did the Apostle Paul really get to see everything he preached about? Huh? Did the prophets ever see completely the prophecies fulfilled, or did they die before the promise was given? Huh? It's no different with these people. The whole idea is this, that they believed to the extent that they were willing to die, knowing that the germ of infection that they had laid out in the public was going to begin to germinate and eventually grow to the extent that it has today. Now, how would you like to be that committed? I asked you the question Sunday, what legacy has the church left? Huh? Think about it. What legacy has the church left? When this country started, and we could go back way to the early 1700s, when this country first started, these Christian men were not interested solely in creating a country. They were interested in creating a country that literally was under God. Everything they wrote was dependent on the wisdom of God that only He can give. Now, everything we have today, literally 300 years later, is because of what? It's because of them. Right? Did they leave legacy? Now ask yourself the question. From these Christian fathers, what legacy has the church left since? Huh? No, please look for it. Jesus left a legacy, and it continues. And people like to say, the fact that there's a church means there's a legacy. But right now, the church is in decline. I mean, even Catholics are saying, well, we don't want to be Catholics because they don't deal with the molestation issue. Now, that's a stupid reason not to be a Catholic. All right? Could you imagine? That's like walking around saying, well, Jesus had a zealot as a disciple, you know, and because he didn't deal with the way that guy murdered people the way I think he should have, we're going to leave Jesus. Fine, go to hell. Huh? Now, we don't feel that Matthew did full restitution to all the people he robbed, and we don't think Jesus dealt with Matthew properly. We're not going to follow Jesus anymore. Good, follow Buddha and go to hell. All right? Now, I think it's a crime that priests run around molesting children. They ought to be locked up in Big Bubba's section of the jail so that they'll know what it feels like. And I'd let them wear that little robe of theirs. I wouldn't put them in a jumpsuit. In fact, I'd make them wear an accessory belt. Make that thing look more like a dress, just to make sure that they get their just reward. But I don't think that's an excuse for people leaving the church. Now listen, you really think those Catholics that leave the Catholic Church are going to come flock into the Christian churches? No. Now listen, I told you, and I wasn't prophesying, I just know better. You think it's going to stop with the Catholic Church? Just the other day, 60 Minutes 2, they were talking about how the Jehovah's Witnesses deal with molestation by elders. Anybody see that? This just last week. They had a section on how Jehovah's Witnesses, they molest kids too. Just last week on the news, I told you, I was listening about a preacher who was dinging the women. Got a 16-year-old, told her how God was going to purify her through this act. Come on, there's better lines than that to use on a 16-year-old. Especially like I got a car. You don't need to lie to them about God's going to purify them. Just give them some money. Give them a little ring. But this preacher says, you're going to be purified. And just so happened this guy was also the chaplain for the Torrance Police Department. Huh? Christian guy. On the news. And, you know, if you listen to AM radio, man, the news is every 20 minutes. I had to listen to that terrible story every 20 minutes. And calling him out by name. Now, why do you think that this is, the church has been the news' new whipping boy? Why do you think suddenly the church is on the front line? What kind of legacy has the church left in the last 300 years? I'm telling you, these people understood how this worked. The devil understands it, but the church doesn't. The church thinks that all we got to do is build our walls. All we got to do is establish Christian aerobics. The church thinks what we have to do. Let me ask you a question. Does anybody here been a Christian for more than 10 years? Does anybody here have Christian music that you bought when you first got saved? Anybody?
Do you listen to that anymore? No. So that crap has no legacy. Huh? Half the sermons, half the tapes you buy 10 years ago, you pick them up and listen to them? No. Why? Because it's probably irrelevant. If they're not teaching the Bible, if that church has not been that lighthouse with the same constant, redundant message of the gospel, that tape you put in is going to be so full of crap that it's going to make the Christmas goose look skinny. You're going to put that tape in and listen to them talk about, Bobby Brown. Huh? Teaching children to play with tenderonis. And I say that because I heard those sermons. Huh? And you put that in, you're going to laugh like, what an idiot. I'll tell you what, I prefer the tenderoni to the knocking boots. Huh? To the brown curlies they sing about nowadays. Huh? Take me in your garden. Yeah, there's no mystery to this anymore. Huh? Take me on a boot ride. Which one do you like better? Tenderoni sounds good to me now, doesn't it? I'm just telling you how irrelevant. Now, see, listen. The gospel is supposed to lay impact. It's supposed to carry a legacy with it. But what has the gospel done in the last 10 years? Listen, we can probably all name preachers who got themselves a humongous church in 10 years. But what's that church doing to society? Nothing, because they're preaching against strip joints. They're preaching against Bill Clinton and his, adultery. They're preaching against everything, but they're not preaching the gospel of Jesus. These people know the game better than the children of God because they understood way back in the 40s that if they preached and laid out a seed, that it didn't matter if they died, wherever they are, I think they're all in hell burning right now, but wherever they are in hell burning, they're laughing their butts off at the notion that we're all becoming socialists. Crying for reparations, welfare, child care. I like that thing I was hearing on the radio today. Up in, I think it's Washington, they're going to pass a coffee tax. You pay 10 cents more for latte drinks so that they can get $10 million to help your kids get educated. Huh? Like if it's the government's responsibility to educate your kids. Now listen, you all know what's going to happen. They're going to create a bureaucracy. They're going to spend that $10 million a year. And next year they're going to say we need $15 million. So now what's going to happen? And now somebody says, why don't they just tax the coffee? Probably come next. I'm telling you, this is where we get the intersection. These people understood that if you lay something out and you have a conviction about it, you'll die, but the fruition will come. This is for everybody that even at the beginning of this series we're saying, come on, Daniel, you really believe somebody stayed up, plotted this, laid it out, and it's happening today? What I want to ask you, are you so naive to think that every day, you believe that 12-step line, one day at a time? Nobody does that. If you're anything on the ball, you don't believe that one day at a time stuff. One day at a time, that's for short-sighted, lame, dumb people. Not one day at a time. Man, you try to lay it out years at a time. If I play one day at a time with my kid, they ain't going nowhere. They're going to be losers. One day at a time. Maybe one day at a time for your sobriety, but it has nothing to do with living. Huh? Christians running around, one day at a time, sweet Jesus. Huh? Well, now listen, isn't that sad that stupid statement has laid out a better legacy than the living Word of God? Is that even in the Bible? How many times you hear people say things like, God, the Lord helps them that help themselves? How did some idiot come up with that? That ain't even in the Bible. And yet there's greater legacy for that. God helps them that helps themselves, brother. How many times you ever hear somebody say, God works in mysterious ways? Where does it say that? It's mysterious to the knucklehead. It's mysterious to the guy that don't know God. It doesn't matter how God does things. It can fall out of the snow. It can fall out of the sky. He can turn a brick into bread. And if you anything on the ball, it shouldn't surprise you. So somebody says, ooh, wasn't that mysterious? No. All I know is Brother Daniel spitting it became food. Does that surprise you? No. Isn't that mysterious? No. If you're spiritually dense, it is. How come these things have more legacy than what God said? You know, you ask anybody, God helps those who help themselves, they'll say, yeah, that's true. It's not even in the Bible. One day at a time, Lord. One day at a time. Could you imagine? Jesus, where are we going? Don't sweat it, disciples. One day at a time. He didn't even tell them, man, we're going to Jerusalem tomorrow. Paul says, man, I plan to go to see you guys over in Rome. He didn't just write them and say one day at a time. That's stupid. We don't like stupid here. All right? I'm just telling you that these people understood the system. And it helps that the devil, in fact, and don't get bent out of shape. These men here, they're humanists. Remember Romans, we read this? It says, being wise, thinking themselves wise, they became fools. These men aren't serving the devil. These men really think they're wise. They really think they have the answers. They're not full of the devil. They're operating the devil's plan. It's laid out according to plan. While everybody's playing one day at a time, the devil's planned it out an eon at a time. Let's read some more. So Karl Marx, Frankfurt School, economic determinism is replaced with cultural determinism. Because they don't have to change the economics of the U.S., they can't. But they can change the culture, and if you change the culture, then you get the money. If a family is deeply Christian and capitalist, ruled by authoritarian father, you can expect his children to grow up racist and fascist. You know what that means? Dan, did you grow up with your mom and dad? Well, then you're a racist and a fascist, and if you ain't showing it now, it's because you're hiding it. You got it. Now, isn't that something? You got a guy that got raised up by a mother and father, and they say you're a fascist and a racist, or you got the propensity of becoming one quicker than anybody else. Huh? Isn't that silly? If a family is deeply Christian and capitalist, ruled by an authoritarian father, you may expect your children to grow up racist and fascist. Charles Sykes, senior fellow at the Wisconsin Policy Research Center, describes the authoritarian personality as an uncompromising indictment of bourgeois civilization, with the twist that what was considered merely old-fashioned by previous critics was now declared both fascistic and psychologically warped. You know what that means? That means if you are a man, a father, or a husband that's the head of your house, you're a fascist, and you're psychologically warped. Now, didn't I tell you that these people are going to call you names? Huh? Now, why would they want to tell you you're psychologically warped or a fascist? Huh? Now, let me ask you a question. The Romans were fascists. The Nazis were fascists. By the way, Americans aren't fascists. They are. Or they were. Why are they calling us fascists? You know, if you say it, enough people believe it. Could you imagine? Where Marx criminalized the capitalist class, the Frankfurt School criminalized the middle class. That the middle class had given birth to democracy, and that the middle class Britain had been fighting Hitler when the comrades of the Frankfurt School in Moscow were cohabitating with him didn't matter. Nor did it matter that the middle class America had given Adorno and his colleagues a sanctuary when they fled the Nazis. The truth didn't matter, for these were Marxist ideologues, and they alone defined the truth. Having discovered fascism's nesting ground in the patriarchal family, stop there. All right, these folk from the Marxist Frankfurt School, these ideologues, these people with the thinking minds, they come to America and they say, there's no proletariat here we can deal with. There's not an oppressed underclass. You know, these people like working for their money. America's doing pretty good. We can't deal with this economic proletariat. We got to find us a cultural proletariat. Do you know who the cultural proletariat are? Kids who got a dad who says no. Huh? A wife whose husband says, no, don't wear that, wear this. Oh, how terrible. Fascists. Having discovered fascism's now listen to this. This is America. They come to America and they discovered fascism's nesting ground here. Isn't that something? Fascists come to America and they found the nesting ground of fascism. Where is it? In patriarchal families. You know what that means? In homes with fathers, where the father's in charge. That's where fascism is breeding. Damn, I must be a fascist. I had a dad, and he was the boss. And he told me to cut my hair. And he didn't let me wear certain clothes. He didn't let me pierce my ears and get tattoos. I didn't know he was a fascist. Now I know what to call him. He was a fascist. Now, I didn't have sisters, but some of you were daughters, and your dad didn't let you go some places, didn't let you date some dudes. He's a fascist. Did y'all know he was a fascist? Don't you thank God these people came from the Frankfurt School, fleeing Hitler, to come here to tell us that? Huh? So, fascism now comes from what? Fatherhood. Now, so what are we going to do? Now listen, what is their plot? What is their plot from the start? Their plot from the start, the revolution failed in Russia. Why? Because there was 2,000 years of Christianity. Remember that? America wouldn't fall because of what? It has thousands of years of Christianity nestled in them. So before you can take the country, before you can change the country, what do you have to do? You have to take out the infrastructure, which is what? Christianity and the institutions that make it. This is why this is amazing. These people understood this. Having discovered fascism's nesting ground in patriarchal families, Adorno now identified its natural habitat. It's in the traditional culture. It's well-known hypothesis that susceptibility to fascism is most characteristically a middle-class phenomenon. That it is in the culture, and hence those that conform are prejudiced. Isn't that something? You're a bad guy. Edmund Burke once wrote, I would not know how to draw up an indictment against the whole people. Adorno and Frankfurt School, however, had done exactly that. They flatly asserted that individuals raised in families dominated by the father, who are flag-waving patriots and follow the old-time religion, are incipient fascists and potential Nazis. As a conservative Christian culture breeds fascism, those deeply immersed in such a culture must be closely watched for their fascist tendencies. These ideas have been internalized by the left as early in the middle 1960s. Conservative and authority figures who denounced or opposed the revolution were branded fascists. Let's go on and read a little more. Another one of the insights of Horkheimer and Adorno was to realize that the road to cultural hegemony was through psychological conditioning and not philosophical argument. That meant they're going to condition you psychologically rather than to talk to you or argue or make any kind of debate. This is why they call you names rather than to argue facts. America's children could be conditioned at school to reject their parents' social and moral beliefs as racist, sexist, and homophobic, and conditioned to embrace a new morality. Now, listen, these were things that were planned in the 40s. Now, do you like the idea that the words used are, they're going to condition your kids? You like that idea? During the 50s school, the Frankfurt School lacked a personality to popularize the ideas. In the glutinous prose of Horkheimer and Adorno, here comes Marcuse, ex-OSS officer. This is what we read last week. Marcuse's candidates now for this new proletariat were the radical youth, feminists, black militants, homosexuals, alienated, and the asocial. Third world revolutionaries, all the angry voices of persecuted victims, marginalized groups of history, not only economically oppressed, but women, racial minorities, and many criminals. These are going to be the new people. They wanted to war a psychological, a social type of warfare. Make love, not war was Marcuse's own inspired slogan. Now, you all thought that was just something the hippies made up, huh? Make love, not war was, now you remember back in the 60s when they were protesting the Vietnam War, everybody running around saying make love, not war. Did it bother you that came out of the Frankfurt School? Huh? For the cultural Marxists, no cause ranks higher than the abolition of the family, which they despise as a dictatorship and the incubator of sexism and social injustice. So what do these people think? That the family is here. Now listen, who's the real enemy? When they're coming against the patriarchal system, when they're coming against fatherhood, what are they really coming against? The fatherhood of God. Hostility to the traditional family wasn't new to Marxists. In the German ideology, Marx himself wrote that the patriarchal males consider wives and children first as property. In The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State, Engels popularized the feminist conviction that all discrimination against women proceeds from the patriarchal family. Erich Fromm argues that the differences between the sexes are inherent, or not inherent, but a fiction of Western culture. Now see, Erich Fromm, he's a guy, he says inherently there's no difference between men and women. It's merely a figment of Western culture, right? So you take out the trash. Huh? Don't ask me for help. When you hear that noise at night, you go. What's that noise outside? Go check. Erich Fromm said so. Huh? Hey, we'll toss you out somewhere. You find out there's a difference. You should know there's a difference. A guy can pull over on the freeway and relieve himself. A woman needs a bathroom. Fromm became a founding father to feminism. To Wilhelm Reich, the authoritarian family is the authoritarian state in miniature. Familiar imperialism is reproduced to national imperialism. To Adorno, the patriarchal family is the cradle of fascism. So what do they do? What is this? How come we didn't throw these people out? To decapitate the family with the father as its head, the Frankfurt School advocated the alternatives of matriarchy, where mother rules the roost, and the androgyny theory, where male and female family roles are interchangeable and even reversed. Now, the way you get rid of the father as the head of the house, the Frankfurt School says we're going to bring out some alternatives like matriarchy. You know what matriarchy is, right? It's the mother's in charge. Now, you want to know to what extent the church buys into this crap? When you get married, how come they join you in holy matrimony? It's the ingathering to the mother. I don't want to be ingathered to the mother. I want to be ingathered to the father. We're blessed here today. We're dearly beloved. We're joined here today to join this couple in holy matrimony. What the hell is that? Holy matrimony? We're going to ingather this couple to the mother? What mother? What's wrong with the church? What the hell's wrong with these priests? What's wrong with these people? Dearly beloved, we're gathered here to join this couple in holy matrimony. Matrimony? The matrimonial bed. The matrimonial... Matrimony? God is about patrimony. Ingathering to the Father. What the hell's wrong with the church? Do you want to know? These people have had more impact and left more legacy than the church. I'm embarrassed. But where's the church? It wants to go after yapping about women's lib, yapping about wars, yapping about all the other crap, and forgetting the gospel. Man, these people were on a mission. The devil wasn't stupid. Listen, don't get me wrong. I'm resolved to this. We're going to live in a socialist nation. One day they're going to say, Daniel, shut up, you can't talk, and I'm still going to talk. All right? That's where we're going. They're going to say, you can't say those things anymore. That's hate speech. You can't talk about fathers being in charge. That ain't right. You're a misogynist, Daniel. You don't like women. I love women. Our culture just lets us have one, though. Then they propagated this thing. It's called the androgyny theory. You know what that means? This is that thing where they tell men things like, now, David, you can't allow yourself to be intimidated. Your manhood isn't challenged by pushing baby buggies and wiping booties, is it? Hey, your manhood isn't challenged because you're wearing an apron and standing in the kitchen washing the dishes, is it? Things like that don't challenge your manhood, do they, Daniel? Your wife bought you that pink shirt and them white shoes. Now, clothing doesn't challenge your manhood, does it? Or are you more of a man than that? What? Now, we all heard that stuff. Huh? We've all heard that stuff. Where'd it come from? These guys. What's the attempt? To cut off the head. Why? Because their belief system is that in a patriarchal house is where fascism is bred. That's where prejudice comes from. This is where corruption takes place. This is where imperialism takes place. This is where the idea that is nurtured that I'm the boss. To decapitate the family with the father as head, Frankfurt School advocated alternatives, matriarchy, androgyny, interchangeable roles to be reversed, female boxing, women in combat, women rabbis, bishops, God as a she. Now, Eddie Olivas was telling me about a movie he went to see when J-Lo decides to put brass knuckles on and tape her hands and take on her husband. I'm going to tell you right now, the minute a woman wraps her knuckles with tape and got brass down there, she better watch out for the chair. I'm telling you, it's on. There ain't a court in the world that's going to convict me when they see the malice aforethought she's bearing. Huh? I'm going to put the chair on the side of her head and drop the stove on top. Huh? Somebody says, you can't talk like that. Listen, some women going to go out and take kung fu behind my back. That's malice aforethought. Huh? She go put brass knuckles on and wrap her hands and play blind kung fu in my living room. She gonna be wearing the chair. Huh? She jump out at me like this with brass knuckles and tape. She's serious. I'll happen to like my face. She's gonna be wearing the chair. The closest wine bottle, the closest brass lamp. Huh? Some people be attending the funeral, not me. In fact, I'll leave the chalk outline there just to remind the next one. All right, let's go on. It's like, women are different, She says, oh, look, there's a bug. I smashed the bug. I leave it there. She said, man, what's wrong with men that leave the bug there? I said, man, I want his friends to know what's going to happen. Women smash a bug. They want to clean it up. And, guys, they just squash it. Like, leave it there. I want people to know. I want your bug friends to know what happens when you cross the threshold here. All right, let's read some more. For cultural Marxism, there's nothing ranked higher than the abolition of the family, which they despise as a dictatorship, and an incubator of sexism and social injustice. Hostility to traditional family wasn't new to the Marxists. This is something that they wanted. Let's see. Let's leave it there. Political correctness is cultural Marxism, a regime to punish dissent and to stigmatize social heresy as the Inquisition punished religious heresy. Its tradition is intolerance. So basically what happens is they preach tolerance and they're intolerant of you. Isn't that funny? They preach tolerance, but they can't tolerate you because you think different. Again, F.A. Hayek, Road to Serfdom. I'm just going to read something real quick. All right. A sharp break not only with the recent past, but with the whole evolution of Western civilization. The modern trend towards socialism between socialism becomes clear. If we consider it not merely against the background of the 19th century, but a longer historical perspective. So this idea of moving into socialism didn't start in the 19th century, but it's something that started way before. All right? We are rapidly abandoning not the views merely of Cobden, Bright, Adam Smith, Hume, or Locke, or Milton, but one of the salient characteristics of Western civilization as it has grown from the foundations laid by Christianity, the Greeks, and the Romans. Not merely 19th and 18th century liberalism, but the basic individualism inherited from by us from Erasmus, Montaigne, Cicero, Tacitus, Pericles, Thucydides, is progressively relinquished. So what's being lost is individualism. Everybody's telling you, hey, we're all the same. You're not different. We're the same. And what they're trying to do is lump us all into the same lump of clay. The Nazi leader who described National Socialist Revolution as a counter-Renaissance spoke more truth than he knew. It was the decisive step in the destruction of that civilization which modern man had built up from the age of Renaissance and which was above all an individual civilization. Individualism today is a bad name. The term has come to be connected with egotism and selfishness. The essential features of that individualism, which from the elements provided by Christianity and the philosophy of classic antiquity, was first fully developed during the Renaissance and has grown and spread to what we know as Western civilization. It is the respect in the individual of man, that is the recognition of his own views and tastes supreme in his own sphere, however narrowly that might be circumscribed, and the belief that is desirable that a man should develop their own individual gifts and bents. Freedom and liberty are now words so worn with use and abuse that one must hesitate to employ them to express ideals for which they stood during the period. Now, this book was written during the 40s, during World War II. Tolerance is perhaps the only word which still preserves the full meaning of the principle, which during the whole of this period was in the ascendant and which only in recent times has again been in decline, to disappear completely with the rise of the totalitarian state. Now, this is something that we've talked about before. Tolerance, he says, is the only word that still means something. That's what he's saying. Now, he refers to liberalism, and I told those of you that want to buy this book, liberalism was what they were calling those who would break from the current government ideas coming out of FDR and coming out of these individuals. If you said, hey, I don't like his policies, they called you a liberal. If you're a liberal now, it's completely reversed. So the meanings change completely flip-flopped. They say, tolerance is the only word that means anything today, written in about 1943. Tolerance is the movement by which they're gaining the most ground. And we've talked about how that socialist agenda began with even the Jews coming out of World War II saying never again. Now, real quick, reading out of Inside American Education, Thomas Sowell. I tell you, a lot of it is in the language. That's why I tell you, it's important for us to understand the language. Understand what the words mean, because they're always changing. The way we change things, the way you change things is to change the meaning. You change word meanings and you actually got a whole generation. There's my little bend in the page. There we go. All right, we're talking about, again, this is, some of you aren't familiar with Thomas Sowell. I don't have time to tell you who he is. He's a thinker from the Hoover Institute, Stanford University's think tank. Probably one of the most brilliant men ever write. Attitude-changing curriculum programs can be assessed in a number of ways, including how effective they are in a specific area. This is about how they teach your kids, by the way. Some people say, I don't know, they don't do my kids like that. You don't know what they do. How effective they are in a specific area which they claim to be effective in, that is drug prevention, for example, the academic and emotional costs they entail, their wider social consequences. The church or the school has determined that their job is to establish, what your kids are going to do in society. Talks about how they established sex education in school and pregnancy went up. Everybody knew that, though, right? When they started doing sex education in public schools, thinking it was their job to tell everybody about sex, and teenage pregnancy went up. All right? Okay. In fact, teenage pregnancy was declining until they started teaching sex ed. Then it went back up. All right? Now, there's numbers that show it went down, but what didn't go down, what happened was they said abortion was okay for teenagers. All right. Empirical evidence also shows that parents with traditional values have more positive impacts than the experts have assumed. More than 80% of adolescent girls whose parents did not permit dating in their early teens stayed virgins. Half of those who began dating at age 13 got pregnant. When Utah passed a law requiring parental consent for minors to be given contraceptives, not only did teenagers' use of family planning clinics and teenage abortions decline, so did pregnancy and birth rates. So what's it saying? Parents are better. Right? Everybody knew that, though. Everybody knows parents are better, right? Than to let somebody else tell you what to do. There's been a controversy over the effects of drug prevention programs. So one issue here is pregnancy, saying parents are better when it comes to dealing with that. Drug prevention. There's a program they put together called Quest. It's responsible for an increase in drug usage among students in this program. How you like that, huh? With psychological conditioning. Now remember, we've already read out of this book, and every time they implement a new program in the school, the root of that program is what? Psychological conditioning. Now how come teachers just can't teach you? How come now you ever remember the old schoolhouse? What's Little House on the Prairie? There was a schoolhouse. And one teacher had kids that ranged from 5, 6 years old all the way to 18. Right? Didn't have a teacher's aide. Didn't have no bilingual aid. Huh? Isn't that funny how she can actually prepare that 18-year-old, that 17-year-old, to go to Harvard, to go off and study abroad in France or in England, and he was ready, while at the same time nurturing the 5-year-old to get ready to go on to the first grade. How come those schoolhouses produced the greatest thinkers of America, and today all the teachers do is cry about, I got 30 kids and no help? I'm just asking the question, okay, because we're paying a lot of money for taxes. All right? All right, here goes another one. Value clarification programs. That's another one. They do teen pregnancy programs. More kids get pregnant. They do anti-drug programs. More kids get on drugs. Now they're going to do value clarification for the kids. It could be more accurately called the values confusion. For it is a whole non-judgmental approach, is at odds with the set of family values that includes right and wrong, and without any concept of right or wrong, it's hard to see what values means. One parent testified before the U.S. Department of Education that her son came home one day very confused as to the rightness or wrongness of stealing. That's nice. After going through values clarification and other psychological conditioning programs. Other parents report similar confusion among children after their parents taught them right and wrong, and the school said that there was no such thing. Things taught in the classroom cause children to rethink values taught at home and cause the children to wonder who to believe. Now, we're reading, now this book was written in 95. Yeah, 95. When did these people start to lay out this agenda of reconditioning children? Huh? Isn't everything they wrote happening? And nobody says nothing? Things taught in the classroom confused children because they caused them to rethink values taught at home, caused children to wonder who to believe. The very phrase values clarification is fundamentally dishonest. When parents tell their children not to steal or not to have sex, there's no ambiguity as to what they mean. Clarification is neither required nor attempted. Right? When you tell your kid don't have sex and don't steal, do you need any value clarified? So why would the school come right behind you and say, well, let's clarify some values? Huh? Clarification is merely a word used to camouflage the process of undermining the child's existing values. Now, what's their goal? They want to cut off daddy. Right? They want to get rid of daddy. Now, in a patriarchal home, who's the one that clarifies right and wrong? So when you go to school and they tell you, oh, that ain't wrong. Programs which attempt to remold the values, beliefs, and attitudes of school children have often been criticized in terms of the particulars of the new values, beliefs, and attitudes. Thus, there's been much discussion about the relative merits of secular humanism versus religious morality or radical ideologies versus traditional values. While these are legitimate issues, the more fundamental question is, who's to decide, and by what right, the values with which children are to be raised. More specifically, who authorized outsiders to intrude into the family relationships, undermine parental authority, and use brainwashing techniques on children. The problems created by these programs are not confined to the particular subject matter of the programs or to those children who become convinced by the brainwashers. The promoters of psychological conditioning programs themselves inadvertently admit the illegitimacy of what they're doing because it's done by stealth, it's done by misinformation and misleading, it's done by secrecy, and it's used using numerous tactics to delay, deny, and even avoid adverse labeling. What's that tell you? Somebody tells your kid, don't tell nobody, what's happening? Anything good? These programs are fundamentally irresponsible, not simply in an arbitrary normative sense, but in the plain factual sense that those that promote and carry out such programs pay no costs if their notions turn out to be wrong, damaging, or even disastrous to some or all of the people subjected to them. Even youngsters who develop no problems in these particular areas may nevertheless have their ties with their parents weakened, confused, or otherwise made insecure, especially during the crucial, dangerous adolescent years. The constant conditioning to act independently of parents and to use similarly inexperienced peers as guides is an invitation to disaster in many ways, going far beyond those covered in a particular brainwashing program. Now, this is what they do to kids. If you really want to know, go get this book, Inside American Education. This will get you mad when you read it. This chapter called Assorted Dogmas, Multiculturalism. Multiculturalism, it's wonderful. Everybody says, we're all different. Multiculturalism. Multiculturalism. Everybody says, oh, we're all the same. Let's love everybody. Multiculturalism. We're not a multicultural country. We're never designed to be a multicultural country. We're supposed to be American. America has this culture. People aren't supposed to bring their culture over here and superimpose it on America and say, this is what America's about, multiculturalism. How many of you ever heard people saying America's about multiculturalism? It ain't about multiculturalism. You ask people that come here from other countries and ask them if they're Italian, they want to be Americans. Then you got white people say, oh, no, you don't want to be American, you want to stay Italian. It's like those idiot professors go out and dig in the desert and find a Zuni basket. And they go to the Zuni ancestors and say, look at here. You need to redo these baskets because this is what your ancestors did. The hell you want to do that to them for? Huh? Multiculturalism, that's what they're teaching kids. Diversity. Multiculturalism. Iranians kill goats in the driveway to welcome you. It might be good in their land, but it ain't good here. Huh? Somebody says, why don't you respect diversity? I respect it, just don't do it here. Huh? Oh, he hides his wife in the house because he's one of them Muslim fundamentalists. He don't believe women should be out. Well, that ain't multiculturalism. That's stupid. That ain't right. I don't care what you call it. Oh, he socks his wife because that's okay in his country. Oh, it ain't okay here. So don't do it here. Look, there's some cultures that are inferior to ours. Nobody wants to tell the truth. There's some cultures just inferior. Right? You know it. I know it. They're just cultures inferior. Nobody wants to. Listen. You want to know the difference between cultures? We already know it. Where'd the migration of God go? Huh? Now let me ask you a question. Because everybody's always crying. They say stuff like, oh, the white man took all this land from the Indians. And Israel took it from the Philistines. Huh? Didn't they? If God gives you the land, you got to take it from someone. Huh? You think Israel's out there crying and the Philistines want reparations? Get in line, baby. When hell freezes over, you might get some consideration, but it ain't going to happen. Oh, the white man, he's so evil. Look what he did to the Indians. Well, let's find out. Who was this white man? Huh? And what did his biblical destiny say? That with his horns he'd push far west. Didn't it say that? He'd push as far as the west can go. Now listen, you can get a globe, and when you see the end of the west, you can see the tip of Alaska. Is Alaska the east or the west? It's still the west. How about Hawaii? How about Guam? Huh? Man, we even got us some islands out there in Hawaii. The Philippines. That's the east. I guess we pushed a little further, huh? Became the west. But you can look at a globe. The horns of Manasseh will push west. Destiny. Now somebody says, but look what he did to the people on the way. So? Now, isn't it funny how the same people that complain about this are Darwinists? And Darwinists say that the stronger of the species not only will dominate over the weaker of the species, but that the weaker of the species will die off. Isn't that what it's... How can you be a socialist Darwinist and not believe in Darwinism? Huh? And always want to be crying with your hand out. You owe me. Talking about we're all the same, but you owe me. And when you stick your hand out to somebody and say you owe me, you've just made yourself inferior. Bunch of greedy crybabies, man. Multicultural diversity and educational dogmas that include relevance. And you'll like this one, educating the whole person. Listen, I know adults ain't whole. I ain't whole yet. Are you whole? We're going to educate the whole person. And we're going to teach them whole language skills and whole life skills. How do you teach kids whole life skills or whole language skills or whole math skills when a kid ain't even close to wholeness? And neither are we. I like that one, whole life skills. We're going to teach the whole person. The whole person. And a general de-emphasis of authority. We're going to stop there. We're still talking about Hitler. And we're still talking about this religious system called Babylon that literally captures the whole world. And I want you to understand why God hates Babylon to this extent. And we'll talk about it on Sunday as we go into the second book of Maccabees as we wrap up what we're reading in Romans. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. And I want you to understand that every socialist experiment in history not only has failed, but it never produced its intended result. Every socialist regime that's ever started, rather than to produce the desired effect, the only thing that's ever happened was literally upper class and servants to the state. Literally slaves. A slave state system. That's why I'm always joking about there's going to be some folk wearing jumpsuits. And people think I'm just clowning. I'm not clowning. That's what happens when this socialist experiment begins to occur, because it doesn't work. It didn't work in Germany, didn't work in France, didn't work in Russia. But damn it, we're going to make it work here, aren't we? And these people have conditioned the minds of their proletariat. Who's their proletariat? Women, children, blacks, Hispanics, minorities, fatherless, everybody who's got a cause. You notice it's never somebody's fault. They're in the stupid position they're in. Huh? Huh? I'm pregnant, have 2 babies. How do you expect me to go to school? I don't expect you to go to school. That's what you get for spreading the legs. Oh, I'm disabled. I can't work. Why not? Nothing wrong with your brain. Got a war wound. Fixed income VA, you know. War's over. Take that brain and go to work. It's always somebody else's fault. And as long as you remain a victim, guess what? You're part of the proletariat. Huh? And you'll never be a part of God's system, because in God's system you got to do something. Jesus said, follow me. Leave it behind, follow me. And I'll tell you what, our role is to establish a lasting legacy. Get out of that treadmill and stop impressing and dancing like Bojangles every time somebody throws $1. That's not our job. Man, it shames me to see that these doctrines that were established have made more headway and established greater legacy than that of Christianity. Christianity, what's it done, huh? That's what I'm saying. People say, well, we established legacy. We're writing Christian music. Christian music don't mean crap. All right? Just like when you pick up your old tapes and records and you pick it up and say, oh, Paul Abdul, Jesus, I can't believe I bought this crap. Huh? You do the same thing when you pick up a tape and say, the whining. The hell are they singing about? Huh? You pick up Christian records, you do the same thing you do with worldly records. You throw them out. There's no legacy. You pick up the preaching tapes, and what are they preaching about? Woman, thou art loosed. 10 years later, what relevance will that have when the society is worshiping the woman? Huh? I guess then they're going to have man, thou art loosed. Huh? By then, men will be sitting on the toilet to pee. Because the system going to work so well. The church needs to establish legacy. The church has left nothing. Now listen, why do people, again, continue to berate the founding fathers of this nation? And they keep referring to them, even white people refer to them as, they're just dead old white men. These are dead old white Christian men who established the greatest nation on the planet. And as long as we discount and discredit them, you lose your identity, regardless of what color you are. You lose your identity, and with the loss of identity is the loss of power. We voluntarily yield up and give up that power. Now, what happened when Adam sinned? That covering, they put the fig leaf on the genitals to cover something. What were they really covering? They were covering their sin. Now, wait a minute. The Bible said they were naked and not ashamed. They were naked, and they didn't need no covering. Why? Because they were clothed and covered in the glory of God. Now, what was the glory of God that covered them? The glory of God not only was something that covered them in the sense that it was like clothing, but what the glory of God was, it was the sign and the token of pedigree. I'm God's. When you see the glory on Adam, that's the same glory was on God. That's like when you look at my kids and say, they look like you, they're yours. Or when I see little Whitney, I say, oh, you can tell he's your son. Right? That's what the glory was, the covering. When Adam sinned, what happened? He lost that pedigree. He lost that covering. It was gone. And as long as he remembered God and sacrificed, he had access. But the minute you forget God, what happens? You're building towers to Babel. You're worshiping other gods. And you're on your way to hell. So this is what this system's about. See, these men, they're wise in their own conceits. This is what Romans is about. That's what I'm saying. These two sermons, Sunday and Tuesday, they're intersecting right now. These men understood. Babylon understands the power of changing words. They understand the power of leaving legacy. They understand that they're going to die and that fruition will come much later. Christians don't understand this. This is why their preaching has been so irrelevant the last 50 years. And God tries to jumpstart it with the Azusa Street revival. God tries to jumpstart it with revivals out in the Foursquare denomination. God tried to revive it in the revivals and the miracles happening through the assemblies of God. God tries to revive it by showing signs and wonders. Doesn't matter how much you try to hide God in your foolishness. He's always going to come out. But every time he comes out, where's the Foursquare Church now? Where are the Assembly of Gods now? Huh? Where are these clowns? Huh? I mean, let's not even talk about Channel 40. Man, I get a better kick out of watching Comedy Central. Huh? I get more revelation watching Homer Simpson. I'm telling you the truth. There's more gospel in The Simpsons than there is on television. Huh? What legacy has the church left? Huh? What legacy has the church left? Think about something that you can reach back and grab that the church has left. What's the church left us? Think about it. Isn't it a shame? Listen, I'm 42 years old. I can't think of nothing. I feel like Paul when I say, these people who seem to be pillars, I ain't getting nothing out of. Somebody says, T.D. Jakes. Somebody says, Benny Hinn. Somebody says, Chuck Smith. Somebody says, Bishop Blake. I'll tell you, I don't get crap from those guys. What are you going to get? I don't get nothing from them. I guess if I was unemployed, Bishop Blake get me a job. I guess if I like to surf, Chuck Smith can take me to Supper Ministry out there at the beach. I guess if I want to lose weight, I can go over here to Pastor Jim over here at Faith Community and get me on that Christian aerobics. But what's that going to do for our legacy in Jesus? What is that going to do for a legacy on this earth? I'm just asking the question because these people understand, and these people have laid it down. What's the church done? Think about it in your life. What's the church done for you? What can you reach back and say, look what I've been able to glean from the church? What changes are happening in Christianity? What changes are happening in our society as a result of the church?